Welcome to CISO Street. I'm your host, Lorraine Smith, and this is another installment of the CISO Perspective. And today I'm here with Gary Gooden from Seattle Children's. I'm really excited to have Gary here with us today. I've been looking forward to our conversation. He's been on a panel of mine before and has talked a lot about the innovation that he's doing at Seattle Children's. So super excited to share this content with you. So let's get started. I want to throw it to you, Gary, and you can do the proper introduction of yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Lauren. So yes, I'm Gary Gooden. I'm the Chief Technology and Security Officer for Seattle Children's Health System here in Seattle. Seattle Children's is a multi-state healthcare system. We service Washington, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. And we're broken up between three tiers of the business. There's a clinical side, the research side, and the foundation side. So I handle the infrastructure stack for the organization, as well as the cybersecurity stack and the cyber physical stack as well, the organization. So again, thank you for having me.
Great. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot to cover and keep secure. So before we get started into the innovation and what you're doing at Children's to protect that whole infrastructure that you're talking about, let's talk about how you actually got started in cybersecurity.
Well, I don't necessarily want to carbon date myself, but a lot of the folks within the technology realm who are my age group, so to speak, fell into technology or fell into IT as a part of their career development. I originally, from an undergraduate perspective, I have a degree in special chemistry. And during the course of my graduate work, which is ostensibly initially to do a master's in chemical engineering, I changed course and ended up doing an MBA in operations research, wherein I had to do some software development. Did software development, and I said to myself, oh, this is interesting. And so I started a journey into IT, as it were. So I went from there into construction, from construction into on the security side of companies like the Semantic Group. Then I drifted into consulting, ended up at the Walt Disney Company for 17 years. When I left the Walt Disney Company, I was the head of technology for their global film business and international entertainment business. Then went over to Mattel, ran global infrastructure at Mattel. Then I went over to Amgen to build out the project management and infrastructure services practice. And then got a call from one of my peers over at an organization called Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and ended up over there. And after a year, they asked me to come become their CISO. So that's how I got formally into the cyberspace. Although when I was at Mattel, I was ostensibly running the security practice there as well. It just wasn't as formalized as it currently is now, because cybersecurity is such a nascent practice. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it was on to where I currently am at Seattle Children's. So that's been this journey, so to speak. And along the way, you tend to develop all kinds of different perspectives, touching everything from the desktop all the way through software development and everything else in between. So it's more about context and perspective is what helps to shape the way I look at technology and security and how that's positioned in the organization.
Great. That's really interesting. I didn't realize you were at Disney for so long. Mm-hmm. My brother worked at Disney as well. We went to Disneyland often on the Disney passes that they had. So yeah, great. Yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, the right word is journey. And everybody that I speak to in the cybersecurity field, like you, is in the journey, right? On the journey, and helps them build perspective. So that's really interesting. So let's get into a kind of a meaty topic. A lot on the mind of people in your job these days is how do we combat this next generation of cyber terrorism? And we've got everything from the increase in ransomware to very complex phishing to so many different things, so many angles that the cyber criminals are coming in. So what's your perspective on stopping that?
Well, obviously it's a problem. The long-term effects, which we can't determine at this point in time. What we do see is ransomware as a service, email as a vector primarily, drive-bys, brute force. These things will continue. Supply chain compromises of some sort will continue. Bad actors, whether they're individuals, mostly advanced persistent threat groups now, will continue to innovate. Why? Because there's an economic incentive. So therefore, they're highly motivated. They're very creative, very talented, unfortunately. So it's at times you feel as if you're trying to push a boulder up a hill. I try to tell people that we're actually in an asymmetrical warfare environment, and this actually is a war. I do believe that there are severe challenges, especially in this country and ostensibly globally, relative to understanding and treating cybersecurity as a national imperative. As we would if, let's say, for example, we had a major disaster in some state, we would activate our national disaster funds. FEMA would get involved. There would be resources made available just by virtue of declaring a disaster, and so on and so forth. There is no such provision today within this country, at the very least, for anything like that. So consequently, you have all kinds of different companies in different verticals that have different reasons to protect their data. If it's in healthcare, then it's PHI, PII, in some cases IP, if you're on the research side, and in other institutions, it is financial data, it's IP, so on and so forth. But all too often you hear stories about companies not adequately funding their security practices. They might have boards in which the security practitioners can't articulate the problem. There's infighting, there is siloing in terms of technology practices, or in addition to which you might have organizations that simply can't afford to have what I consider to be the starter kit for security. So it's very hard to level the playing field, and I see it especially in healthcare, which unfortunately, good, bad, or indifferent, seems to be still somewhat of a laggard in terms of cyber resilience and readiness. When I came to Children's 2.5 years ago, it was something that was a challenge at the beginning. And very quickly, we've developed a fairly robust security program that is probably robust for the healthcare environment, but it's probably not robust from a cybersecurity environment. Meaning, if I were to look at our security program within the vertical, you would say, oh, you're doing well. But if I were to just look at the security program just by itself, irrespective of industry, I would probably say, no, we're not there yet. So there's a tremendous amount of work left to do. But the overriding threats, as I said, are exponential. And the rate at which we pivot and are malleable is certainly not keeping pace with the quote unquote mental dexterity displayed by the bad actors, because they have this economic imperative. I don't have a silver ball, a crystal ball rather, but it doesn't sound good. But all that being said, it's clear to me that basic cyber hygiene practices, basic blocking and tackling, processes that you can not just have, but validate, in other words, trust but verify, are simply things that must be done above and beyond massive investments in terms of technology, if nothing else. We also have a problem where we don't have global consensus as to how to treat digital currency in terms of the payment modalities used to pay cyber threat actors. Even though there's still traceability, there's no global consensus on regulations around digital currency. That's a problem.
Yeah. How do you think? That's a real interesting topic, and often spoken of when I speak to the CISOs. So, what do you think would make that, I guess, add equal the playing field in that area with the currency, and how kind of from a global approach?
Well, I mean, if I'm doing a wire transfer from a bank, okay, I have to verify source it's going to, sources coming from. So in other words, there are inherent checks and balances within the banking industry today. So this is no different. Those best practices don't exist because you don't have global consensus on banking standards, and the banks in themselves are not in the workflow as it relates to digital currency. So there's no brokerage. So the bank is not playing the middleman role that it currently plays today. So I say that as a fundamental problem. Right. How that's going to be resolved, I do not know. And quite frankly, even if they resolve that issue, because these individuals are creative, they will be like water. It will simply find a way.
They seem to be always one step ahead when we should, yeah. We need to get to that position of being a step ahead.
But I think it's very difficult to do that only because a lot of the cyber practitioners and other folks that are trying to protect businesses aren't really doing it with a profit motive in mind. It's a job that they're doing, and they're subject to all of the bureaucracies inherent to that particular company and its culture. So it's just very difficult to move at the same speed as the bad actors do. So from my perspective, what you need to start pivoting towards are managed service offerings by companies that focus on just doing those things and doing them at scale and doing them in such a way that they can scale to match what's happening on the threat side at a pace and at a level that you can't, whether it's by virtue of extending personnel or whether it's by virtue of ratcheting out the technology through machine learning, AI, etc. So that to me is something that will continue to develop as these security services get fleshed out.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we need a coming together, like you said, of governments in the countries on the global level to combat it. I know Charles Carmichael from BIRI and Mandiant is often, talking to Congress and Washington and talking about that need to communicate. And so hopefully there'll be some headway there just to try to get a foothold in this and get ahead of the actors.
They will need to move very quickly.
Yeah.
We have 5G that's upon us, and 5G in of itself we will have indeterminate consequences. A lot of them good, some of them bad, by virtue of adoption of 5G, and then beyond 5G. We talk about, you heard the prior administration, for good, bad, or indifferent, talking about sanctions against companies like China, which in of itself probably didn't make any sense, but you start to go down this rat hole of thinking in terms from a Western perspective, not really understanding who you consider to be adversaries or understanding who you consider to be your friends, and knowing fully well that you operate on one planet. So I think it's a very complicated situation.
It definitely is. So tell us about the technology innovation that you're focused on at Seattle Children's.
So about a year and a half ago, we started to get on this pathway as it relates to zero trust as a philosophy. And I've seen and heard from vendors who talk about zero trust as if it's some product. I've heard vendors talk about SASE software as a secure access service edge as a set of products as well. And they aren't. These are concepts, some more mature than others. But at the heart of it, zero trust was a nice way to wrap up a set of thought processes around the age-old process of trust but verify. If you think about zero trust, firewalls are a part of zero trust. Right? Identity access management is a part of zero trust. Segmentation is a part of zero trust. So the whole idea of wrapping everything up in this one nice clean term made sense to me, because I could then use that from a marketing perspective to start to articulate the position of trust but verified to our executive suite and to our board, and to try to stay consistent on the message. A lot of technology folks tend not to focus on marketing, and I think that's a missed opportunity. I think if you're going to be a technology leader, whether you're a CIO, a CTO, a CISO, I just happen to be both a CTO and a CISO, you have to be able to tell a story. If you can't tell a story, and or if you are not personally liked by your executives, C-suite executives and or the board, it's ostensibly game over. And those are not technology issues, these are human issues. So we started along this journey about 1.5 years ago, and everything that we're doing is centered around this notion of using security as the tip of the spear for innovation. Meaning, if I can affect the end user experience, meaning the true North Star for us is the upliftment of the end user experience, which is still a challenge, then that's going to do a couple of things. It's going to provide clinical workers, non-clinical workers with what they need to provide care or support care at a speed that they couldn't do it before. It's going to allow researchers and folks who are trying to raise money to researchers to find cures, and folks who will raise money at a rate that they couldn't do it before. All while wrapping what you're doing with a security wrapper around it. The idea being zero trust with less friction. So that's what we've been trying to do since, I would say, late 2019. We have a fairly robust identity and access management program, because a key tenet of zero trust is identity and entitlements. Role-based access control in our environment is about 60% automated, which is still not there yet. For me, the nirvana for our back is probably about 85%. Anything above that is fantasy, as it were. But that said, entitlements tied to, in other words, the identity of the individual, which is tied to the technology, or like an endpoint, which is a slave to the individual, is critical. We don't really think about the data center, the center of the universe anymore. That's gone. We don't think about the jewels, as it were, as something that sits on premises. As a result of what happened with COVID, the home router became the new edge. So the imperative is to allow some provision to allow knowledge workers to be able to work, whether at home, in the office, in an airport, in a hotel room, in a coffee shop, in the same way, but the same cyber health checks, the same security controls as I would see if they were sitting on premises. So that's been a journey that we've been on for the past, I would say, a little over a year now, which is one of the reasons why I also have infrastructure, because we can then build an infrastructure program around security as an imperative tied to efficiency in work. So that's what we've been doing since then.
Great. I mean, it's all of that is, it's a hefty task, but I'm kind of drawn to the piece about being able to communicate to your leadership and how important that is, because you can have all the bells and whistles, right? But if the leadership isn't on board with it, it's really difficult to implement and have a good, strong security program. So sounds like you're, got your hands full there, but doing a great job on it. There's so much to zero trust that, like we said, there's so many pieces of it that are irrelevant, and it's good to hear that you are embracing that. A lot of the folks, there's many people that are trying to learn zero trust and implement it. It's not an easy thing, but you have a good grasp on that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about ransomware, and I'm curious as to your thought on to pay or not to pay. Seems to be people are on either side of that. So what's your perspective?
It's an interesting question. Yesterday I had the opportunity to actually present to a board. I tend to present out to a subset of our board every quarter. And yesterday I was asked to present out to another subset of the board. a larger subset, including our CIO and our CEO and the chairman of our board. And one of the questions I was asked is, do we have a process to assess when to pay and when not to pay? And I explained to her, I said, no, we do not. I said, that's a conversation that I'm planning to have with both the ELT, the executive leadership team, and the board. There are pros and cons either way. What is clear is that even if you did pay, there is very little data to suggest that you actually get everything back. That's just a data point.
Right.
And at the same time, you'll hear from the FBI that you don't pay. Then you also understand, because there is no public-private partnership, that's a suggestion. It's not a dictate. So all companies have to weigh from a loss perspective, the risk-reward paradigm. Do I pay or do I not? And if I don't pay, what does it mean to my downtime and my bottom line? Oh, and by the way, if I do establish a history of pain, maybe it will happen again. Maybe it will happen again. So my knee-jerk reaction is not to pay, only because you're just simply incentivizing bad actors to continue to act badly. But at the same time, we have to be in a situation where we are cognizant of the fact that if you take a position that we will not pay, then you better have a security program in place that's robust enough to give you some peace of mind that the risk to the environment is low enough where you can take that kind of position.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, and not case by case, but I mean, in your situation, you're working with a hospital, there could be lives at stake, right? It depends to that level what the consequences will be if you don't pay. And, you know, and definitely important to have that conversation and be prepared on how to react.
Well, somebody asked me a question. They said, well, if I'm worried about being held to ransom, and my response to them in relation to the question about whether you pay or not to pay, and my response to them was, well, I tend to worry at an even deeper level. They said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I tend to build a security program from an apocalyptic mindset. So I start, in the case of physical security, I think of things in terms of active shooting scenarios. And then when I think about patient safety outside of the physical security realm, I think of that child who is hooked up to a medical pump, who has multiple medications going to him or her, and the potential to have that pump compromised, an infusion pump, and the bad actor not caring to let you know, but to compromise a child to make the point that you can't protect your most vulnerable. So that goes above and beyond a ransomware threat. That's almost nation state level threats.
Right.
So that's where I start from. And then the security program is built on the premise of not letting that ever happen. And as good as we may be in terms of stopping things, it only takes one. It only takes one. Yeah.
That's right. Not an easy task.
So that's our philosophy.
Okay. So let's talk similar topic-ish, cyber insurance. And the industry is going through big changes. You know, we've heard 2 years ago that was just a checkbox on, you know, the form when you filled out to get the cyber insurance. Now it's like a security questionnaire, pages and pages. And, you know, the rates are going up, premiums are going up. So how do you see these changes impacting the way that you manage your cyber risk program?
Well, yeah, the premiums have gone up appreciably, almost exponentially. And yes, it used to be a perfunctory check, right? And it's all done. Now, as you said, it's a fairly extensive questionnaire, and it really depends on who the underwriting entity is and who has been assigned to you, because I also have seen a gap between just general understanding. Our last go around in terms of renewal took almost 4 weeks of back and forth questions, and then when you think of that relative to the size of the premiums that have to be paid for the level of coverage you're asking for, at some point, we will probably have to have the discussion, is it worth it or not? Because certainly the insurance companies are just managing risk. They're just managing risk and they're running the numbers. And we have to be aware of that. And if the threat landscape continues to escalate at the pace it is, and there's nothing that tells me that it won't, I think a lot of companies will be faced with the dilemma of just simply saying, you know what, having cyber liability insurance is simply not worth it anymore. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that discussion is probably something that's probably going to happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah, definitely. That is the conversation often that I hear. And, the premiums are going way up, and it's because, they've lost so much money in doing the payouts, and it's catching up to them. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how the industry changes. There's been so much interest in it. We're probably going to do a whole panel discussion on cyber insurance in the coming months and try to get some insurance agent, the brokers and those types of that kind of category of people on the panel. Should be an interesting discussion to hear from them.
I would think, yeah.
Yeah. So let's kind of switch gears and talk about, you're talking about it is a war. It definitely is. Let's hear some interesting war stories that you've come across, just in terms of either security incidents or breaches. I'm just curious, kind of what's your most interesting incident that you've been through and how you resolved it?
Well, knock on wood, I haven't been through any major incidents.
Okay, good. I'm knocking on wood here.
and maybe by virtue of this, I'll be then targeted. Who knows? I just read about the horror stories. I've had one close call, based on the whole notion that it only takes one. That's just a really bad day, bad week, bad month by one and all. There's a hospital in Southern California that was geographically close to the health system that I was a part of, and they got compromised. They were shut down for well over a month, literally paper. But because they were physically close, the board was concerned that we were then in the crosshairs, as it were. And we tried to explain to them, I said, we could be as close as a foot and as far as 1,000,000 miles, it wouldn't make any difference. So proximity is not an issue. That wasn't the issue. But to see the angst, the internal upheaval that occurred within that organization, trying to deal with that set of issues, was enough to turn one's stomach. And again, it all came down to basic blocking and tackling relative to cyber hygiene and just general good practices. No, you should not be going to your browser from one of your servers if you have elevated credentials. Or as a matter of fact, you shouldn't have elevated credentials tied to your user profile. Those should be separate. Oh, and by the way, if you want to take it a step further, you should have a PAM solution in place that you only get least credentials when you need them. Things of that nature. All right. Almost every single incident that I've been not party to, but observed and being informed about by virtue of associations or what have you, lots of them have come down to just a lack of basic cyber hygiene. I think it's really interesting when you think about organizations that invest a lot of money in cyber security tools, bringing in some of the best technical folks, and they still get compromised. I remember when they had the Target breach. And when I think about the cybersecurity program that Target had relative to other entities, it was large. But it's, again, if you think about this whole discipline of trust but verify, and if you think about the discipline of looking for the things that you would not normally look for, then you stand there's a higher probability that you'll probably get it right more often than you're going to get it wrong. So of course they were compromised through the HVAC system. Right. Why? Because it was probably likely that that security program at that point in time did not have cybersecurity under its remit. And I would go to a legend state that there many cybersecurity practices in organizations today where cyber physical still does not sit under the auspices or the oversight of the CISO. In some cases we have a CSO, yes, but in many cases we still have a CISO. They may not have cyber physical under their remit. And that's just another vector into the environment. So yes, you can buy the best of breed technology. You can check all the right boxes. You can write all the best SOPs. You can have the best policies. You can have the squeakiest compliance team possible and still be had if you don't believe in the whole idea of trusting and verifying.
Very good. Trust and verify. That's it's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
It sounds
Thank
simple.
you. Yeah. No, I know it definitely sounds simple, but like we've talked about for the last 30 minutes, it's not. It's very complex and deep, and you've got to have all your bases covered. I've heard recently just a couple conversations as I'm getting ready for some upcoming panels. The CISOs have been talking about going back to basics and making sure that all the bases are covered, and they're working on a zero trust policy. And kind of using that as their framework, but they talk a lot about going back to basics and just having that in place, which is really important.
I think an interesting thing is I tend to hear those comments a lot, like going back and writing a zero trust policy, but I tend to take a slightly different point of view. My point of view is to just go and action it. So if you didn't have a NGFW, next gen firewall, then you should have one. Do I need to write a policy for that? No, you just need to go do it. Should you have anomaly detection looking at east-west traffic within your environment for deep packet inspection? Yes, you should. If you don't, do I need to write a policy for it? No, you just go and implement it. Do I need to have the wherewithal to be able to tap in the cloud because the data doesn't necessarily live within my data center anymore? Yes, you should just go and do it. So I guess what I'm saying is that common sense, which is not necessarily common, should really drive the way you think about security. Think of the worst that can happen. And if you can think about that, then you can think about the solution to stop the worst thing from happening. If you can do that, lead with technology first, then you can work on people, then you can work on process or process and people. But if you don't have your technology, and if you're not honest with yourself in terms of the quote unquote notion of trusting and verifying, which is the process, then policies won't really make a difference. That to me is checkbox security. It sounds really great, but it's hard to really manage it if it's not really verifiable and it's not something you can test over and over again. There was this issue many, many years ago where they would start to do within an OR, you do checks, you have a checklist to go through everything ready for particular surgery. Well, that as a best practice didn't come from the healthcare industry. It came from aviation. The whole idea of having a checklist. It's common sense. It made sense. Well, if I'm going to fly this plane, I don't want to kill me. I'm supposed to keep these passengers safe, but if I can't keep them safe, but I'm not keeping myself safe and I'd like to go home. Okay, right. But if that's true, might I not want to check to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I can actually do it without dying? Well, yes. Okay, so folks in the medical industry say, hey, this thing might be a good thing to adopt here. Let's try it. And we did it. So it's just looking at the problem, stripping it down to its basic components and addressing the problem. If you focus on security in that way, then you have a better chance of building a proper program. And that, of course, being coupled with your ability to articulate the problem. If you can't market the vision, if you can't articulate the problem, you can't build the program. So writing policies to the cows come home won't really matter if you can't sell the mission and the vision.
Excellent. I love that advice. And it's a good way to kind of wrap up our conversation. I'm going to close out with one question that I love to ask every person that comes on CISO Street. And that is what you like to do when you're not in CISO mode. I know that's not very often, but
no, it's not actually. I used to cater as a hobby. So I love cooking, but I'm an ex-sports person, so I run a bit, and I used to coach at a very competitive level, youth soccer, both at club and an academy level, and miss it greatly. And just be with my children. That's critical.
That's great. What's your favorite dish to cook?
I don't have a favorite thing to cook. I'll cook anything. If you can think it, I can do it.
That's amazing. Very good. I love hearing that. I love to cook too. It really helps take my mind off of everything. So
I also love to cook because too often we find ourselves in a situation where as a society we don't really understand people. And if you don't understand somebody, you should talk to them. And one of the best ways to talk to people is if you're breaking bread.
That's very true.
It's what I believe, and I actually apply that philosophy to the way I work as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and all your insight. Amazing. So to those that are listening, thank you for joining, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you on CISO Street. Let me know the topics you're interested in hearing, and also if you're interested to be featured in our perspectives, be sure to reach out to the site. So thanks again, and this concludes our interview with Gary Gooden.